Is the average cost of a four-year degree in Missouri really $64,000? These are all questions that can be answered using an analysis method called a hypothesis test. There are several parts to a hypothesis test. The first part is identifying what's assumed to be true and what we hypothesize. Analyzing sample data, that gives us a test statistic, comparing a couple of values, and based on the results of this comparison, we decide to reject our assumption or fail to reject our assumption. Now, I should point out these hypothesis tests are always statements about the mean. We are hypothesizing the average of a population is less or greater or not equal to something, which gets us to what's called the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis, symbolized by a capital H with a subscript of 0 or O, it's an assumption that we make about the mean. We assume the mean is equal to 20 ounces. Our alternative hypothesis, symbolized by a capital H with a subscript of 1, sometimes a subscript of A, it's also about the mean, but we're hypothesizing that the mean isn't K, so the mean does not equal K, or sometimes the mean is less than K, or the mean is greater than K. So we don't think the mean is what they say it is. The null hypothesis in this first example here with the soda would be the mean is equal to 20 ounces. And in the second example, or in the alternative, would be the mean is not equal to 20 ounces. The last example with the cost of a four-year degree, the assumption is that the mean is $64,000 versus the alternative, the mean is greater than $64,000. Sometimes the null hypothesis is stated as the status quo or what they say. Those are my terms. What they say refers to the people who should know, who we consider experts. Now, experts depend on what the information is. Experts could refer to the manufacturer or the business or maybe some government organization. The alternative is what the researchers think. And sometimes it's not researchers, maybe it's consumer groups. Maybe it's just you. Hey, I've had a lot of experience with this, and based on my experience, I don't think that's the case. So here's an example. We're going to use this example to come up with our null and alternative hypothesis. We've got this company that makes ball bearings, little bitty steel balls for precision machines. The average diameter of a certain type of this ball bearing should be 6 millimeters. To check that the average is correct, the company formulates a statistical test, a hypothesis test. So we're trying to figure out what the assumption about our average size should say. So what are we going to use for HO, the null hypothesis? Well, we're going to use that the mean is 6 millimeters. We're assuming that our ball bearings are correctly made. So our alternative hypothesis then has to do with what I think might be happening or what would be a problem for the manufacturer. Now, these ball bearings are put into precision machines so that they run correctly. If these ball bearings are too big or too small, the machine is not going to work correctly. So, with that in mind, we come up with an alternative that says the mean is not equal to 6 millimeters. And the reason it's not equal, it's not just greater or less, is because being too big or small either way would present problems for the company. They are very much interested in it being too big or too small. Here's example 2. Got a package delivery service, think FedEx or UPS. It claims it takes an average of 24 hours to send a package from New York to San Francisco. An independent consumer agency is doing a study to test the truth of this claim. Several complaints have led the agency to suspect that delivery time is longer than 24 hours. So the null hypothesis, that's the one that's related to what they say. In this case, they is going to be our package service, our UPS or FedEx. Well, they say the average is 24 hours. And for the alternative, we're going to assume the delivery service doesn't underrate themselves. So our alternate hypothesis has to do with the consumer agency. And the consumer agency thinks it's longer than 24 hours. So our null hypothesis should say the mean is equal to 24 hours. The alternative should say the mean is greater than 24 hours. Now back to our list. What's assumed to be true and what's hypothesized, that's our null and alternative hypothesis. And the next part has to do with getting a test statistic, which is related to our alternative hypothesis. Now, this test statistic is a z or a t value, and it's related to an amount of area in the tail. This is referred to as the tail or tails of the test. This is entirely dependent on the alternative hypothesis. If the alternative hypothesis says less than, the mean is less than k, some value k, that means that our t or z score is going to be on the less than side of the dotted line, the mean. So t and z would be negative. If it's a right tail test, that means that we say the mean is greater than k. So our t or z would be on the greater than side of our mean. So we'd have a positive value here. And if our alternative says that the mean is not equal to k, that means that it could be greater than the mean. It could be greater than this or less than this. So we've got both a negative and a positive value here.